My name's Bruce Chambers. I'm 59 years of age, and I was born in Hobart, but I've been on the peninsula on and off for the last 40 years. My earliest memory of the sea was fishing with my father at Black Jack, which is near Saltwater River. When we were very young, 5 kids, and we all used to go out in an old dinghy, put the nets down, catch the fish, cook the fish, and live fairly basic. And they were probably one of the keys for me coming back and loving this area so much, was the availability of sort of fresh seafood, relatively easy to get, and I enjoy eating it. It was mainly a holiday thing, and then fast forward sort of 20 years, I ended up buying a property at Coonya, and I sort of continued what I was doing from when I was a child of 5 years old, except that I was doing it and feeding my own family, as opposed to being one of the in the nest being fed by my father. So now I've sort of gone to the next stage, another 20 years, and now I'm feeding the public from the same source. And I've sort of noticed that that source is diminishing rather rapidly, and the dynamics of that source, while it's the same as it was when I was first involved with the sea, 40 years ago, or over 40 years ago, the numbers and types of fish have changed since then. I guess the quantity of fish has diminished dramatically, so it's much harder to catch fish, and the legal processes and how much you can catch and take have also increased. So it's become far more difficult for people to use fish as a basic food ingredient, which is my concern, not only in Tasmania but worldwide, where fish has been perceived as a cheap meal full of proteins. Now it's becoming an expensive option and has to compete with other food types for that sort of protein. Probably the short answer is that fish stocks are diminishing, and I don't think the public perception of fish stocks, not only in Tasmania but Australia-wide, has caught up with what's going on. And I don't think the legislation in the government has caught up with what is actually occurring in nature's swimming pool. So my role, and I spend more and more time every year, is trying to explain to people what is occurring out there. And when I say out there, I mean from where the fishermen source their product. The fishermen in numbers have declined. They certainly have to work much harder to stay afloat financially, and I don't foresee many more fishermen being able to. The industry can't take any more fishermen coming on, even young people. It's extremely expensive to become involved, and the returns for the amount of work outlaid, there's so many other options. It's a declining industry in the fact that there's no reward for young people who, there's much more easier ways to generate income from the sea by, getting coxswain's tickets and master's tickets and becoming involved in the oil and gas industry or the tourist trade, rather than trying to generate an income catching wild fish. I think they lead a very sheltered life in the cities, and they listen to what's written in the newspapers. While some of that's quite good, I think it's sometimes well clear of reality. Australia's a net importer of fish, and it'll continue to be in the future, probably more dramatically than it is now. And I think it's also papers and governments both want to portray something that's not always reality. it's very clear in Tasmania that we are selling something. While we have it, it's not in abundance. So we would like to give everybody this feel-good experience that we have a lot of seafood available at a cheap price, when in actual fact we have a minimal amount of seafood available at a quite expensive price. And it's also important to recognise that the seafood's all about freshness and the time frame or the logistics of when it's caught to when it's eaten. So I think that these issues aren't addressed by the tourism bodies that promote seafood or other interested parties that also have a financial interest in keeping going with the status quo. They're not willing to change and recognise what's the current situation. I think it's an educational process, and that's part of my role in what I do here each day. And I think it's not easy to educate people quickly, particularly in relation to something that they don't always have a interest in. They have a short-term interest in eating good seafood, but they're always interested to hear a story associated with seafood. So it's somehow we can't turn the clock back, but we've got to use what we know from history of what's occurring and try and bring it to the public's attention to make them aware. And I think that the Asian people, which is 50% of our business, are well aware of the difficulty in securing fresh seafood. So, and there's a lot more Asians out in the world than there is, local Tasmanian people. So they know that the increased demand for fresh seafood in their countries has virtually sourced their seafood. And I think that most of the high value seafood products, namely abalone and crayfish, their markets are already 90% tied to the Asian market. I treat fish like a deck of cards. I say that the coloured cards, the kings and the queens and the jacks, they're already gone. And I say the king is the striped trumpeter. We don't sell it. We probably sold more striped trumpeter in Tasmania than any other fish shop. Most of those fish are 70 years old, and we've noticed that there's genetic disorders. So there's a small breeding pool around Tasman Island with the striped trumpeters, and the size of the fish being caught has gone from sort of 16 kilos down to 6 or 8 kilos. That's the standard size. So we've stopped selling that, and also we don't like selling them to people who really don't understand their value. They don't appreciate how old the fish is in age, and they don't also appreciate how hard it is to catch and the quantity is available. So we've stopped selling it. So from our side, while we can easily sell it when we can, we've taken the move of saying to people, look, there are other fish that taste just as good, that are more sustainable, that are easier to catch. A fisherman can't survive catching striped trumpeter. He won't survive. So he knows, we know, that they're not sustainable in numbers, so the public should know. So we're doing an industry off our own back, restricting that available. You talk about blue-eye trevally. Well, there hasn't been hardly any blue-eye trevally in Hobart caught locally the last 2 years. And then we've got the sustainable fish, or the fish that I think is, the jack, the 11, is it the 12 and the 11 and the 10? That's the area that we market. And I think that the jack is the trevally, is the blue wahoo or snotty trevally as it's called. It tastes very similar to blue-eyed trevally, but it's a net fish, and I think that people find that as one of the best fish that they can eat, and it's far more readily available locally. So we only sell local fish. Then you've got the other fish that follow suit, you know, the flathead, the trumpeter, and probably the wild card in the whole pack is the Australian salmon. I don't think that has, at this stage, really been recognised by the rank and file people, not only for its taste and its general goodness. So I think that will become a key fish in the ongoing scenario. And then behind that you've got other fish that, you know, the wrasse, leather jacket, and so on down to, I don't know a bad fish, you know, that mainly a bad fish is a fish that's probably full of bones. So that's from the perspective of the consumer. So at the end of the day, we concentrate on that mid-range fish, the trevally, the trumpeter, the Australian salmon and flathead, and of course calamari, which is the sort of the topping, so to speak, in any fish dish. My message is that if anybody's ever gone hungry, then I treat that piece of fish like gold. If I sell a piece of fish to somebody, I expect them to treat it in the same manner, eat it in the same manner as I treat it when I get it from the fisherman. So it's an endless chain, and I'm only a link in that chain. You know, that fish comes from the sea, pristine environment. It's handled with care, like gold. I deal with it and dress it and sell it accordingly. I really don't have to sell fish because people are seeking it out, good quality fish. It's very hard to secure good, fresh quality fish. So I think that it's very important that people get from that fish all the energy that's not only been put in from its growth in the sea, but the people have touched that fish along the line. So it's a process. What we try to do is present the very best product that we can in the freshest state. So from my perspective, I think that, and that's why we have a lot of people seeking the real thing. There's no additives, there's no funny business, there's no waving of the wand. You know, it's the real thing without all the condiments. Bare, naked, tasty. So that's how it comes. We had a new fisherman come the other day, and fishermen are full of stories. It's a romantic life, and most of the characters are fairly romantic and a bit rough on the edges. But I guess to see a big catch of fish is something that I now treasure, because you don't see it anymore. And you know, you hear these stories. I caught this fish, you know, a crayfish that was 3.5 kilos, a flathead that was bigger than me, and all these stories, and they're hard to believe. You know, are we fact or fiction? So that's, you have these characters that abound in the industry, and you only got to make your own thought process. You see them in the papers sometimes. So I guess I had a young fisherman come, and he rang me up, as they do now, on the mobile phone. Oh, do you want some trevally? And my answer always is, oh, maybe. Okay, how much have you got? I said, well, he said to me, I'm full to the gunnels. Where are you? Oh, I'm just out in front. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Okay. So you hear these stories, and you're never sure until you actually sight the boat and the fisherman. So for a small fisherman in a 14-foot aluminium dinghy was 600 kilos of trevally, it was a big surprise. Not only financially to me, because that always hurts. There's always this battle between the fisherman getting his money, me getting the fish in a good condition, and the customer being happy. So there's always those three that always have to be in balance for the equation to work. So I haven't seen a large amount of fish like that for a long, long time. And I guess the other facts that crayfish and abalone are like drugs and guns. So I think you always are very wary when you are dealing with those types of items. So when you have crayfish here, you're on alert. You know, there might be 500 crayfish sitting in the tank, and there's a lot of villains and people like that still active, and one has to be alert.